Well, the topic for today is unity and Eastern religions. That seems to be a question that comes up from time to time. People say, oh, unity kind of reminds me of some Hindu traditions, or I hear some Buddhism in unity and things like that. And I think that's just one of the things about unity that many people find attractive, is that we welcome and encourage you to study and learn about other faiths. And for those of us who grew up in, let's say, a more Orthodox Christian tradition, that's really a breath of fresh air, isn't it? I'll tell you, it wasn't all that long ago that you would be considered an apostate, a traitor to your faith, if you visited the church or the service of another denomination or another group. And I can remember, this was just in the mid-60s, my own parents, they had to ask permission from the pastor of our Catholic church because they wanted to go to a nephew's wedding that was being held in a Lutheran church. And the answer was no. You can't go. And this is surprising. We hear about Vatican II, the ecumenical reforms of Vatican II in the early 60s, and yet there were still some holdouts, which to me just lends credence to the old saying that sometimes it's a lot easier to seek forgiveness than to ask permission. They should have just gone anyway and then come back and ask forgiveness. But anyway, that's not a problem that we have in unity. In fact, that's not a problem that the Fillmores had when they started the unity movement back in the 1880s, because they were working with a blank slate. They made it a part of their mission to study other religions. Here's this Charles Fillmore quote that I like so much. He says, "We have been readers among all schools of thought, and we find good in all of them. We do not claim to have discovered any new truths, nor have had any special revelation of truth. There is truth in every religion. It is my privilege to take truth from any source, put it into my religion, and make it a fundamental rule of action in my life." And he wrote that back in 1895. Now you might say, surely he exaggerates when he says that we have been readers among all schools of thought. Take a look at this reading list. I put this up there not thinking that you're going to, for a moment, be able to read any of it. I just want you to see that is a listing. Each line is a different book or publication that Unity back in the late 1800s, I think this is from the first edition of Modern Thought, which was the predecessor of Unity magazine. This was back in 1889. I got this from the archives back at Unity Village. This is a list of all the books and pamphlets that Charles and Myrtle had worked with and then were offering for sale. You could order these through Unity back in those days. So he wasn't kidding when he said we have been readers among all schools. They were part of an ecumenical revolution in this country. And I just love being a part of a movement that values this kind of curiosity and learning. And we can see, if you were able to read all of these, you could see that when Charles started out, he was taking what you might call a shotgun approach. He was literally into everything. You're going to find books on there about yoga, Buddhism, Islam, Christian Science, Swedenborg, the Rosicrucians, Egyptology. I even found a book up there by a book on Judaism by a Rabbi Schindler. No relation that I'm aware of, but you look at this, and I really admire the effort that goes into that. And some of you may disagree with me, but I think it's possible to get too many ingredients on your pizza, so to speak. Some ingredients just don't go together, right? How about a sauerkraut and anchovy pizza? Is that anybody's mouth watering at the prospect of that? You can cast your net so widely that it becomes difficult and maybe even impossible to be discerning. You can bet that a lot of the publications up there are 100% contradictory with each other and inconsistent. So there was a time, perhaps, when Charles thought that this movement could be everything to everyone. And then he realized that it would probably take more than a couple of lifetimes to be able to study everything with any kind of depth. So Charles later on intentionally adopted a more narrow approach. Originally he wanted to be a jack of all trades, and there's that old saying, if you're a jack of all trades, you're a master of none. He wanted a degree of mastery. We have to be careful that we don't get too scattered in our approach, because we run the risk of becoming shallow and superficial when it comes to spirituality. There's a term they use for it. Sometimes they say a mile wide and an inch deep. Another way of looking at it is we have to decide if we want a whole bunch of shallow wells or just a few really deep ones. And personally, I want the deep ones. If I had to name the three faith traditions that have had the greatest influence on the unity movement, they would be the Judeo-Christian tradition, Buddhism, and then the Hindu traditions. Back when Charles was writing in 1895, people in this country knew very little about Eastern religions. They knew next to nothing about Buddhism and the Hindu traditions. It was at the Parliament of World Religions. This was in 1893. The Parliament of World Religions was held in Chicago. That was the first time that representatives of the Hindu Vedanta tradition and Zen Buddhism first came to this country and were introduced to the people of the West. And even then, most of the Buddhist writings out there, Buddhist scriptures, they hadn't been translated into English yet. So nobody knew very much at all about the Eastern traditions. And what we can see here, with Charles getting into it in that list of books there, he was, once again, ahead of his time. He anticipated our Western fascination with Buddhist and Hindu traditions. And those traditions are important because they do something that the Judeo-Christian tradition doesn't do so well. Buddhism and the Hindu traditions place experience and practice above authority and revelation. They're practical. When a person engages in a practice, they can learn things about mind, they can learn things about consciousness by direct experience and study of the mind, instead of relying on pronouncements that you have to take on faith, or pronouncements that you're required to believe because they come from an authority figure, or pronouncements that you're required to believe because they are some sort of a special revelation from on high, given to usually someone in authority who then passes them along and you're supposed to take it on faith. That's how it worked. Buddhism and Hindu traditions, they didn't have that problem. They had a very different perspective on reality. To them, reality and consciousness were intermingled, intertwined in ways that anyone could study and experience. They don't insist on belief in a creator God. In fact, Buddhism is sometimes considered to be non-theistic. No personal God entities are required. Another thing that's refreshing about Hindu and Buddhist traditions is that they do not insist that they have all of the answers. They don't insist that their teachings are the only truth to be found. And Charles Fillmore agreed. He thought that truth was too big to be contained in the teachings of just one religion. And yet, that's exactly the kind of thing that we will hear from Orthodox Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. They insist that theirs is the one and only exclusive path to God, the only container of eternal truth. And do you know how they know that? Because their holy books say so. How convenient. It's kind of like the napkin religion. Anybody ever hear of the napkin religion? The napkin religion. The napkin religion is the one true religion because it says so right here on this napkin. That's sort of the way that it works. Now, that's not to say that you can't find spiritual mystics in the Islamic or Jewish or Christian traditions. You'll find Sufi mystics like Rumi. You can find Christian mystics like Meister Eckhart. But here's the major difference. They were suppressed. They were called heretics. Their writings were banned. You might say that they did their thing not because of those faith traditions, they did it in spite of those faith traditions. There was a Sufi mystic, Mansur al-Hallaj, who dared to teach that the truth of God could be found outside the Islamic faith, and that people were one with God. The Muslim caliph had him executed for heresy in 922. That's what the mystical traditions were up against within those traditions. Buddhism and Hinduism, again, didn't have that same kind of problem. Now, not too long after I chose our topic for today, I learned about a brand new book that just came out this last Tuesday, September 9th. It's called Waking Up, A Guide to Spirituality Without Religion. Now, this book is written by a guy named Sam Harris. You may remember him from some of his books around 10 years ago. He wrote a couple of books. One was called The End of Faith. The other was Letter to a Christian Nation. Sam Harris is an atheist. That is the label that he chooses for himself. In fact, back when those books came out, he was branded I don't know who came up with this term, but they called them the Four Horsemen of the New Atheism, which was Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, and Daniel Dennett. He has nothing good to say about most religions, and yet when I got into the first chapter of this new book, I read this quote here. He said, "I had viewed organized religion as merely a monument to the ignorance and superstition of our ancestors. But I now knew that Jesus, the Buddha, Lao Tzu, and the other saints and sages of history had not all been epileptics, schizophrenics, or frauds. I still considered the world's religions to be mere intellectual ruins, maintained at enormous economic and social cost, but I now understood that important psychological truths could be found in the rubble." Now, I've studied his work for years, and I've seen some expressions of spirituality and mysticism in his work, but this statement really made my jaw drop. I never expected to hear anything quite so conciliatory of traditional religions coming out of a book written by Sam Harris. And I'm going to be doing a review of this book. I want to have it for the October newsletter. But today I want to touch on a few of the author's insights, because first of all, they're very contemporary. I mean, this is cutting edge stuff right now, and they're still very relevant to what Charles was trying to do, the unity approach to using Eastern traditions to help us in our study of mind and consciousness. Now, first and foremost, we need to note that Sam Harris is a scientist. He has a PhD in cognitive neuroscience, which is the study of the interrelationship between mind and brain. He also has a bachelor's degree in philosophy. He studied Hindu and Buddhist meditation in Asia for a year, so you can see that he brings a unique mix of expertise to this topic. And the spiritual practice that he recommends for waking up is something you hear us talk about here all the time. It's mindfulness meditation, which is an ancient Buddhist form of meditation that is free from the religious and cultural trappings of those religions and those parts of the world. So here's what he has to say about mindfulness. He says, "The literature on its psychological benefits is now substantial. There's nothing spooky about mindfulness. It is simply a state of clear, non-judgmental, and undistracted attention to the contents of consciousness, whether pleasant or unpleasant. Cultivating this quality of mind has been shown to reduce pain, anxiety, and depression, improve cognitive function, and even produce changes in gray matter density in regions of the brain related to learning and memory, emotional regulation, and self-awareness. Yeah, Karen has given the fist pump over here. You guys are studying a book in your women's, your Sisters of the Good Circle that deals with some of these questions, and you're going to be seeing and hearing more about this as time goes on. Charles discovered the same thing about the benefits that can be had from this simple form of practicing awareness. He called the practice the silence. He was entirely self-taught. Maybe he got some glimpses and some tidbits from those different books that were available, but remember, this was before the time when you could go down to your local bookstore and see shelf upon shelf of books on meditation. Today there are meditation teachers galore. Not back then. Charles was having to find his own way as best he could. And yet he still talked about the positive physical and emotional effects of having practiced the silence. After about a month, he began to notice greater senses of energy, awareness, emotional well-being, and things like that. Here's something else from the book Waking Up. He says, although the insights we can have in meditation tell us nothing about the origins of the universe, they do confirm some well-established truths about the human mind. Our conventional sense of self is an illusion. Positive emotions, such as compassion and patience, are teachable skills. And the way we think directly influences our experience of the world. Well, now where have you heard that before? We've just spent a whole month on our 5 basic principles, and all of that is interwoven in what we've been talking about. The insights of Eastern spiritual tradition show up in our basic unity teachings. Charles Fillmore was a prolific writer, and the reason I think that he wrote so much was because he was trying to get this experience into words at a time when nobody really understood what he was talking about. That's what happens. He used terms like the silence for his experience of mindfulness. That was his practice of mindfulness meditation. He used the term Christ consciousness as a way of describing his experience of consciousness that's beyond the illusion of the conventional separate self. Something that we stress over and over again is that we are not this separate, ego-driven self. And as always, he talked about the incredibly powerful way that our mind and our thought processes are directly responsible for the quality of our life experience. Now, we can see all of this blended together in this last quote I want to leave you with from Waking Up. He tells us that the traditional goal of meditation is to arrive at a state of well-being that is imperturbable, or, if perturbed, easily regained. The French monk Matthew Ricard describes such happiness as a deep sense of flourishing that arises from an exceptionally healthy mind. The purpose of meditation is to recognize that you already have such a mind. That discovery, in turn, helps you to cease doing the things that produce needless confusion and suffering for yourself and others. You already have such a mind. We need to be reminded of that constantly. That's what we do in unity. We have such a mind, exceptionally healthy, more imperturbable than we realize, and I can't think of too many other traditions that send that message. The power is within you, as we like to say in unity. We are already whole and complete. It's just a matter of moving in that direction. That's what Charles was trying to accomplish. And that's why these Eastern traditions are so helpful in moving us in that direction. And I think that that's one of the the great areas of opportunity for unity going forward. They say in the inside cover of this book that there is something like 20% of Americans who follow no religion but who suspect that important truths can be found in the experiences of such figures as Jesus, the Buddha, Lao Tzu, Rumi, and so on. And so Sam Harris is arguing that there is more to understanding reality than science and the secular culture generally allow. And we're saying the same thing. So what do we need to do to get that 20% of the people in here to see what we might have to offer? I'm not sure, but I'm trusting that some ideas will occur to us and that this is an open opportunity for us. So that's all for today, and we will see you. Actually, we'll see you in 2 weeks, because we're going to take a week off, a little vacation time. And I invite you to come next week and listen to Reverend Mary Lee Revels. She is the retired minister from Stockton, and she's going to have a wonderful talk, and Billy and Kelly will be here, and then we'll see you in 2 weeks. All right, thank you.